The morning session in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom began like any other. People filled the benches, some nervous, some impatient, some simply observing the judge's reputation for compassion. The next case on the docket was a minor traffic violation. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. Just another name on the list. Next case, the bailiff announced, scanning the room. Jimule Pac. Pacquiao? A young man rose quietly from the back row. He walked forward with measured steps, his shoulders straight but his expression humble. Despite the casual hoodie he wore and the soft-spoken way he stood at the podium, there was something about him, something respectful, almost disciplined in the way he carried himself, yet no one recognized him. No one. To the audience, he was simply another young person who had made a small mistake on the road. Judge Caprio, ever warm and welcoming, smiled as the young man approached. "Good morning," the judge greeted, voice filled with kindness. Jimule nodded politely. "Good morning, Your Honor." There was a faint nervousness in his voice, the kind people have when they're trying to remain calm in front of an authority figure. But he remained respectful, hands folded, posture straight. "Tell me what brings you here today." Judge Caprio said. Jimule, "I'll explain the situation softly. A misunderstanding about a parking sign and a ticket issued late at night." His explanation was gentle, not defensive. Even in this simple interaction, his humility stood out. Judge Caprio watched him closely. Something about the young man felt different. His tone, his manners, the way he never blamed anyone, even though many in his position would have. But the courtroom was still unaware. Even the judge had no idea who was standing before him. And then came the audience. Hook. But when Judge Caprio learned who was standing before him, the entire courtroom went silent. Judge Caprio leaned slightly forward, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the citation. "Well, Jimule," he said warmly, "you seem like a very polite young man. Let's talk about this ticket." "Yes, Your Honor," Jimule replied respectfully. The judge began asking questions. "Where were you parked? What time was it? Did you see any signs?" Jimule answered each question honestly, calmly, and without any irritation, despite the fact that parking rules can be confusing and frustrating. His humility was impossible to miss. "You know," Judge Caprio remarked, "most people come in here already upset or defensive. You're very composed." Jimule smiled shyly. "I just try to respect the process, Your Honor." That sentence alone caught the judge's attention. Respect the process. Not many young people said things like that. Judge Caprio studied him for a moment, curiosity growing. "And what do you do, Jimule? Are you a student? Working?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'm studying, and I also train boxing mostly." That made the judge raise one eyebrow. "Boxing? That's a tough sport." Jimule nodded gently. "I grew up around it. It taught me discipline." There was a pause. The judge sensed something deeper, something about this young man's character that didn't match the usual tone of the courtroom. So he asked another question. "Where are you from originally?" "The Philippines, Your Honor." The judge smiled. "A beautiful country." "Yes, sir." At this moment, the audience watching the recording felt the energy shift. There was something about this young man that kept pulling attention. Not because of fame, nobody knew that part yet, but because of how grounded he was. And now came your shot. And now came your engagement break. Have you ever met someone who impressed you with just their humility? Comment yes if you believe respect always wins. The scene in the courtroom was simple, but viewers could already sense that something unusual, something powerful, was unfolding. Judge Caprio had met thousands of people over the years, but only a few ever made him pause, look closer, and wonder who they really were. Jimule Pacquiao was becoming one of them. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, intrigued, So you box? Tell me more about that, he said. Jim took a breath. Well, I've been training since I was young. It's been a big part of my life. Did you choose it yourself? The judge asked, or was it influenced by someone? There was a small pause. Jimil looked down not in shame but in thought. It's part of my family, Your Honor, but I do it because I love it. Your family? The judge repeated. Jimul nodded. Yes, sir. My father taught me a lot, not just about boxing, but about discipline, about staying humble. The judge noticed something. Jimul said this with sincerity, not pride. It wasn't an attempt to impress. It wasn't a brag. It was simply the truth of how he was raised. Tell me about that. Judge Caprio said gently. Jimul single quotes voice grew softer. Growing up, I saw my father work hard every day. He always said that no matter how successful you become, you have to keep your feet on the ground. Respect others. Respect yourself. Never act like you're better than anyone. The courtroom grew quiet. Even people who had been distracted began listening. And has life always been easy for you? The judge asked. Jimul shook his head modestly. No, Your Honor. My father came from nothing. He struggled as a child, poverty, hunger, everything. He always reminded us where we came from. He never wanted us to forget the value of hard work. Judge Caprio felt a tug in his chest. He understood struggle. He understood family values. And he recognized honesty when he heard it. So your dad is a boxer too? The judge asked casually. Yes, sir, Jimul replied. But he didn't elaborate. The judge picked up on that. Most people, if their father were famous, would say it immediately. They'd lead with it. They'd emphasize it. They'd rely on it. But this young man didn't. He was standing here alone, not using fame as a shield. Not once did he speak of privilege. Not once did he ask for special treatment. The courtroom energy shifted once more quiet, emotional, curious. People began studying him more carefully. Some whispered, "He looks familiar." Is he? No. Can't be. But Jimul ignored it all. His focus remained on the judge, respectful and steady. Judge Caprio continued. What are your goals? What do you want to achieve? Jimul smiled, and it was earnest, not confident, not arrogant, but true. I want to make my family proud, Your Honor, not because of their name, because of my character. That sentence hit the room like a wave, and Judge Caprio felt it deeply. Judge Caprio folded his hands and studied the young man carefully. Something wasn't adding up, and yet everything made perfect sense. You mentioned your father taught you discipline, the judge said. Yes, sir. And he boxed? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Caprio tilted his head. What's his name? Jimul hesitated just for a moment. Not because he was hiding anything, but because he wasn't used to introducing himself by relying on someone else's accomplishments. Quietly, humbly, he answered, My father is Manny Pacquiao. Your Honor. The courtroom froze. Absolute silence. A collective breath held in shock. Even the air felt heavy. Judge Caprio blinked. Manny Pacquiao? As in, the Manny Pacquiao? Jimul gave a small, shy smile. Yes, sir. And that was it. That was the moment whispers burst throughout the room. That's Manny Pacquiao's son? Oh my God, really? I didn't even recognize him. He's so humble. People pulled out phones. Eyes widened. Jaws dropped, but Jimul didn't change. He didn't puff his chest, didn't smirk, didn't act superior. He simply stood there respectful, grounded, unfazed by the attention. Judge Caprio leaned forward. You're Manny Pacquiao's son? Yes, Your Honor. And you didn't feel the need to mention that earlier? Jimul shook his head. It wasn't relevant to the case, sir. I'm here because of a mistake I made, not because of my father's name. That sentence struck the judge like lightning. Most people would have led with fame. Most would have used it as leverage. But here was the son of one of the greatest boxers in history standing alone, taking responsibility, seeking no special treatment. Judge Caprio smiled slowly, admiration forming in his eyes. "You know," he said, "your father is a legend. And from what I've seen so far, I think he raised a fine young man." The audience nodded in agreement. They weren't impressed by fame. They were impressed by humility. Judge Caprio's face softened. His tone changed not as a judge, but as a man who had lived long enough to appreciate character. "You know," he began, "I followed your father's career. Not just the victories, not just the championships, but his journey." Jimil listened respectfully. "I remember," the judge continued, "watching Manny Pacquiao rise from poverty. He came from a life most people can't imagine, struggles that would break many. And yet he fought, and fought, and fought." The judge paused, his voice growing emotional. "But what always touched me wasn't his strength in the ring. It was his humility outside of it. He never forgot where he came from. Never forgot the people. Never forgot himself." Jimil bowed his head appreciatively. "And today," the judge said, his voice cracking just slightly, "I see that same humility in you." The courtroom grew quiet, emotion thick in the air. Judge Caprio continued, now speaking from his heart. "You know, when I was young, my parents taught me something very important. They said, respect is the greatest gift you can give, not fame, not money, not titles, respect." He looked directly at Jimil. "Your father earned respect through hardship, but you're earning it through character. That's far more difficult." People in the courtroom began wiping their eyes. Then Judge Caprio told a personal story, a rare moment. "When my father worked long hours to support our family," he said, "he never once complained. He used to tell me, 'Frankie, be kind. Success means nothing if you forget kindness.' And I see that same lesson alive in you." Jimil swallowed hard. Touched by the sincerity, the judge smiled gently. "Your father must be so proud, not because you're following in his footsteps, but because you're carrying his values." The room was silent but deeply emotional. Jimil whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor." Judge Caprio finally returned to the case, though the emotional weight in the room remained. "Now," he said warmly, "let's talk about this ticket." He reviewed the details again, where the car was parked. The unclear sign, the late hour. "This appears to be a misunderstanding," the judge said. "I'm dismissing the citation." Jimil's eyes widened with gratitude. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much. But," Judge Caprio added, "I want to say something more important than any verdict." The courtroom leaned in. "Young man, the world needs more people like you. People who don't rely on fame. People who show respect, humility, and accountability. You walked into this courtroom as any other citizen, and you carried yourself with honor." Jimil nodded, touched beyond words. "If more young people behaved the way you did today," the judge continued, "the world would be a better place." He tapped the bench gently. "Case dismissed. And keep walking the path you're on." Jimil bowed respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor, truly." And with that, he exited the courtroom not with the swagger of a celebrity, but with the grace of a man raised with values. The court session ended, but the story was only beginning. A few hours later, the clip of Jimil Pacquiao and Judge Caprio began circulating online. At first, only a few hundred views, then thousands, then millions. Within days, the video had gone viral in multiple countries. People weren't sharing it because Jimil was Manny Pacquiao's son. They were sharing it because of his humility, because of the judge's wisdom, because of the emotional moment when two different generations connected through shared values. Comments flooded the internet. Humility is everything. This brought tears to my eyes. Judge Caprio always brings out the best in people. Respect is priceless. Manny Pacquiao raised a good son. It became more than a courtroom clip. It became a lesson, a reminder. Moment of humanity in a world hungry for inspiration. And so, the video continued spreading, touching hearts far beyond the courtroom where it happened. Final call to action. If you believe true greatness comes from humility, type humble in the comments and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this.